Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we plunge headfirst into the stories that don't just entertain us, but fundamentally reshape our world. Today, we're not just opening a file, we're prying open the lid of a cultural coffin.
Hey, nice.
We're diving into a game that didn't just scare us, it fundamentally changed how we play, how we tell stories, and even how we view popular culture itself. We're talking about the 1996 PlayStation classic, Resident Evil.
And our mission today is to truly understand the intricate layers of this foundational title. We'll journey through its surprisingly humble origins, dissect the genius behind its tension-filled design, trace its often arduous development,
Yeah.
uncover the fascinating story behind its global launch, and ultimately grasp its monumental and lasting impact on the gaming world and far beyond.
Get ready to discover why this game was really a masterclass in raising the stakes and crafting unforgettable fear. You're about to have some real aha moments, I promise. The unsettling origins and bold vision, a blueprint for fear.
Okay, so when you hear Resident Evil, your mind probably conjures images of shuffling zombies, right? A grand, eerie mansion, maybe even a delightfully cheesy line or two.
Sure, sandwich anyone.
Exactly. But here's the truly striking aspect. This genre-defining masterpiece didn't just burst forth fully formed from a designer's imagination. It actually boasts a surprising, much older sibling in its DNA.
That's right. The genesis of Resident Evil wasn't an entirely fresh concept, but a direct evolution of Capcom's 1989 Famicom horror game, Sweet Home.
Sweet Home, okay, I remember that one dimly.
Yeah, producer Tokuro Fujiwara, who is Sweet Home's creator and Shinji Mikami's mentor, explicitly proposed this new project as a remake. He saw an incredible opportunity to finally achieve graphical fidelity that simply wasn't possible on the Famicom, and he held a profound belief that horror games could become a genre in themselves. Wow, so that was the vision from the start. High stakes right there.
Incredibly high stakes for the project, yeah. Aiming for nothing less than carving out an entirely new category in gaming.
So it began as a spiritual successor, basically building on those core ideas, especially since Capcom no longer held the rights to the Sweet Home license anymore.
Exactly. But the parallels are absolutely uncanny. We're talking about a direct, undeniable lineage here. What specific elements did they explicitly adopt or borrow? I mean, it's quite a list.
Lay it on us.
It's quite expensive, actually, almost like a blueprint. The core gameplay system was directly based on Sweet Home. For instance, the limited item inventory management. This wasn't merely a technical constraint, it was a deliberate design choice directly carried over.
Right, the tiny inventory, always juggling keys and herbs.
It immediately creates immense tension. Every single item you pick up, every bullet, every herb becomes a strategic decision because your pockets are only so deep. You're constantly weighing survival against precious space.
Which instantly elevates the stakes for every encounter. You're not just fighting a monster, you're fighting for space in your inventory, for the next vital item.
Yeah.
That's a psychological burden few games at the time imposed, wasn't it?
Precisely. Then there's the mansion setting itself. That iconic claustrophobic environment that traps you becomes almost a character in its own right, and that's directly inspired.
The Spencer Mansion, yeah, iconic.
The intricate puzzles that cleverly break up the action and require exploration and genuine brain power, these were also a staple of Sweet Home. Crucially, there was an unwavering emphasis on survival over combat.
You definitely weren't Rambo.
Not at all. You weren't a super soldier, you're just trying to get out alive. This fundamental design choice profoundly amplified the feeling of vulnerability and dread, making every enemy encounter a moment of potential crisis.
And what about that most iconic, almost comical element that also built incredible suspense, the door loading screen? That one wasn't just a stylistic choice, was it? It felt like forever sometimes.
Not at all. It was a clever technical workaround for the PlayStation's loading times, but it inadvertently became a masterclass in building suspense. You knew something was probably behind that door.
Oh, yeah. Your heart pounds.
But you had those agonizing seconds of watching it slowly open, anticipating the jump scare. It transformed a hardware limitation into a powerful psychological tool, which is a fascinating example of accidental genius in game design.
Absolutely brilliant in retrospect. What else?
Beyond that, Resident Evil adopted the use of scattered notes and diary entries as a primary storytelling mechanism, allowing you, the player, to piece together the horrifying narrative and lore of the mansion. Little snippets of dread.
The Keeper's Diary. Chillin' stuff.
Exactly. The game also featured multiple endings depending on which characters survived, enhancing replayability and reinforcing the feeling that your choices had real consequences.
Oh, sure.
A huge stake in the narrative progression.
Yeah, who lives, who dies.
Well, yeah.
Mattered.
The need for backtracking to previous locations to solve later puzzles created a sense of a living, interconnected space. But it also meant re-encountering areas that were previously cleared, often with new, terrifying threats waiting for you.
Ugh, yeah. Never felt truly safe.
And the visceral death animations provided shocking feedback for failure, directly inheriting the brutally horrific imagery from his predecessor. It wasn't just game over.
No, it was, you've been decapitated or eaten alive. That really amplified the dread, made you not want to fail.
Exactly. You also had individual character items like Jill's lockpick or Chris's lighter, adding unique utility and character distinction, making you choose carefully.
Jill's extra slots and lockpick felt like easy mode sometimes, compared to Chris.
Yeah, a bit. And of course, the scarcity of restoring health through items like herbs and first aid sprays made every single one precious, turning every decision to heal into a strategic gamble. The intricate layout of the mansion itself and the direct lineage of its chilling visuals were all drawn from Sweet Home.
Okay, so here's the crucial insight, right? Resident Evil didn't just draw inspiration from Sweet Home, it took that game's very DNA and evolved it into something truly revolutionary. It's like Sweet Home provided the skeletal structure, and Resident Evil was the terrifying, fully realized organism that defined a whole new genre. That's a truly meaningful conversation about artistic evolution and the high stakes of adapting existing ideas in gaming.
Indeed. It demonstrates how creative constraints and existing ideas can be recontextualized and pushed forward with new technology to create something entirely revolutionary, impacting not just gameplay, but the very emotional response of the player. It really resonated.
But the path to that revolution was anything but straightforward. This game almost didn't look anything like the Resident Evil we know and fear. The development was kind of wild.
Oh, not at all. The early prototypes of Resident Evil are almost unrecognizable. Production actually began way back in 1993, originally for the Super NES.
The SNES? No way.
Yeah, with Koji Oda, who had worked on Super Ghouls and Ghosts, leading that initial effort. The initial setting was even described as more of a hellish place, before it eventually changed to a more realistic setting. Imagine that on the SNES.
A hellish place on the Super NES? That would have been a very different kind of terror. Pixelated demons, maybe?
Who knows? Then came the first big shift. In 1994, development moved to the PlayStation, and they experimented with a prototype featuring a fully 3D first-person perspective.
First person, like Doom, but with zombies.
Sorta, yeah. This was influenced by Sweet Home's first-person battles. Initially, it leaned into a supernatural, psychological Japanese horror style. Again, similar to Sweet Home, but then they pivoted.
To what we now recognize, the Romero influence.
Exactly. They moved to an American zombie horror style, heavily influenced by George A. Romero films like Dawn of the Dead. But even then, the iconic fixed camera wasn't a given. Shinji Mikami discovered Alone in the Dark from 1992 and was influenced to adopt its cinematic fixed-view camera system.
Alone in the Dark, right. The precursor.
Yeah, and Mikami actually admitted that if it wasn't for Alone in the Dark, Resident Evil would have had a first-person view instead.
Wait, Mikami was initially reluctant to use that fixed camera, wasn't he? That's quite a twist for such a foundational element. Seems so integral now.
He was. He felt it had an effect on immersion, making the player feel a bit more detached. Which is interesting, right?
Yeah, counterintuitive.
However, he ultimately adopted it because the use of pre-rendered backdrops allowed for a higher level of detail than his fully 3D first-person prototype, which, as he put it, didn't get along so well with the original PlayStation specs.
Ah, the classic hardware limitations driving design.
It was a technical compromise born of necessity that ironically became a foundational design choice, raising the aesthetic and atmospheric stakes for the entire experience.
So hardware limitations birthed design innovation. That's a recurring, fascinating theme in game development. What other wild ideas did they explore that never made it into the final cut? I heard rumors about co-op.
There was a later prototype that featured cooperative gameplay, yeah. But it was eventually removed because Mikami said it technically wasn't good enough. Early footage from 1995 showed this co-op mode, along with different outfits and real-time weapon changes, which also didn't make it to the retail release.
Wow, co-op Resident Evil back then.
They also had lost locations like a graveyard, which ironically made it into the 2002 remake later on, as well as guest houses and a tower, which were replaced by the guardhouse and the lab in the final game.
Okay, and this is where things get truly wild for me. Imagine a first-person co-op Resident Evil. How would that have completely changed the tension, the jump scares, and that profound feeling of isolation so central to the game we eventually came to know?
It'd be a completely different beast.
It really underscores the high stakes of those early design decisions, doesn't it? Every one of those detours could have resulted in a completely different game, a different experience for us, the players, and potentially a different course for an entire genre.
Absolutely. The choices made, often out of necessity, ultimately crafted the game's unique, terrifying gameplay loop that would go on to define survival horror. The path was twisted, but the destination was iconic. 2. A new breed of fear. Gameplay mechanics that defined a genre.
So these early experiments and inspirations culminated in a very specific set of gameplay mechanics that became the undeniable blueprint for survival horror. Let's delve into surviving the Spencer Mansion, because it truly was a masterclass in restricted movement and creating profound vulnerability.
The core gameplay loop was a deliberate, almost sadistic blend of action, exploration, puzzle solving, and as we've mentioned, very tight inventory management. But the journey into fear started with a crucial decision for you, the player. Character choice.
Chris or Jill?
You chose between Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, and this immediately raises the stakes. They aren't just cosmetic options. They have distinct perks that fundamentally influence how you approach the game.
Chris, for example, is tougher, right? More health, handles heavy weapons better, and he starts with that lighter, which you need for certain puzzles, adding a unique utility to his journey.
Yeah, he's the tank.
Yeah.
While Jill, on the other hand, boasts increased inventory capacity, 8 slots versus Chris's more restrictive 6, and she starts with a lockpick.
The master of unlocking.
Exactly. Which opens doors that Chris needs to find fiddly little keys for. This creates immediate replayability and a distinctly different strategic experience, fostering curiosity about how each character's journey unfolds and making you wonder about the paths you didn't take.
Then there are those fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds. We know it was partly due to hardware limitations, but what did that really do for the player experience? How did it specifically manifest for us, like moment to moment?
It created an unparalleled cinematic sense of tension. You never knew what was just off screen. Every new camera angle was a potential jump scare, a fresh threat lurking just out of sight.
Yeah, the dog hallway still gives me chills.
That feeling of constantly being watched or not being able to see around a corner was a huge part of the fear. It profoundly amplified the sense of vulnerability because your field of view was so deliberately restricted, turning the mundane act of entering a new room into a terrifying gamble.
And what about the controls, the infamous tank controls? Many players found them frustrating. I know I did at first, but were they perhaps another deliberate stroke of genius for building tension?
Ah, yes. The tank controls. Love them or hate them. These stiff, deliberate controls where your character moves forward relative to themselves rather than the camera.
Yeah, turning felt like steering a boat sometimes.
Exactly. It absolutely heightened the feeling of vulnerability and clunkiness. Trying to precisely navigate tight corridors or quickly evade fast-moving enemies like hunters with these controls was incredibly stressful.
Understatement.
Mikami himself noted that this system had an effect on immersion, making the player feel a bit more detached or less agile, but this very clunkiness became integral to the player's feeling of being fragile, almost clumsy, in a hostile environment. It's a brilliant, if initially frustrating way to amplify tension and make every movement feel precarious.
So the core insight here is that these aren't just technical details. They are deliberate design choices that plunge you into a world where survival is a constant, desperate struggle. They made you feel the fear, the isolation, the sheer dread of being in that mansion. Every step was a risk, every corner a potential nightmare. It's a testament to how game design can directly manipulate player emotion.
And that feeling was further compounded by the game's brutal economy of terror, resource scarcity, and vulnerability. This was absolutely not a power fantasy. You felt weak.
Oh, the limited ammo. I still remember the sheer panic of seeing 0 rounds for the shotgun. How did they manage to make that scarcity so visceral and impactful?
That's a critical design choice, truly a masterstroke in building tension. Reportedly, it was inspired by the randomized dungeons and limited supplies of an old MSX game called Alcazar, The Forgotten Fortress.
Never heard of that one.
The scarcity meant you absolutely couldn't kill every enemy. It forced strategic evasion running past zombies or agonizing choices about who to fight and when. You started with virtually nothing, a flimsy knife, a basic pistol.
The knife was basically useless.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
While you could scavenge for a shotgun or a powerful magnum, the overriding rule was simple. Ammo was gold. Every bullet had to count, making every missed shot a chilling gamble, a direct contributor to your dwindling chances of survival.
Which means every missed shot, every wasted round, increased the tension exponentially. knowing you might face a worse enemy, like a tyrant with nothing left.
And health. It wasn't just a simple bar, was it? That EKG thing. No. The game used an electrocardiogram in the inventory screen instead of a simple health bar. This visually communicated your character's deteriorating condition. Fine, caution, danger, in a much more impactful, almost personal way. Healing with herbs and first aid sprays made these items incredibly precious, adding another crucial layer to the resource management, forcing you to ask, is this wound worth a precious herb now, or can I push on a little longer?
Constant calculation, and then there's the constant pressure of managing a tiny inventory. 6 slots for Chris, 8 for Jill. I remember constantly having to decide what to keep, what to discard, and what to stash in an item box. The stakes were always high, even just managing items.
Those item boxes found in save rooms were a godsend, but they also created their own kind of tension, as you often had to backtrack just to get a crucial item, potentially exposing yourself to new threats or revisiting previously cleared, now haunted areas.
Yeah, the long trek back to the save room.
And arguably the most iconic and high-stakes mechanic tied to resource scarcity was the save system. Typewriters and ink ribbons for saving progress.
Ink ribbons. The bane of my existence.
This wasn't just a routine action. It was a desperate, calculated decision. Do you use a precious ink ribbon now, potentially wasting it if you die immediately after? Or do you risk more progress for a potentially safer opportunity later? That's incredible tension, turning the simple act of saving into a strategic puzzle in itself.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these mechanics aren't just gameplay. They're psychological tools, aren't they? They force you to question every bullet, every step, every save. What's fascinating here is how these seemingly restrictive elements actually amplify the tension and investment, making every small victory feel monumental. They forced you into a mindset of perpetual fear and desperation, making you deeply invested in your character's precarious survival.
And all of this was masterfully woven into a compelling, let's say, B-movie inspired narrative that unfolded as you navigated the terrifying mansion, raising the narrative stakes with every discovered clue.
Let's delve into that plot. The setup itself is a masterclass in building a mystery with incredibly high stakes, both personal and global. It kicks off on July 24th, 1998, in Raccoon City. We've got Bravo Team, part of the STARS Elite Task Force, sent into the foreboding Arklay Forest to investigate these really gruesome cannibalistic murders.
Right, creepy stuff happening outside the city.
They go dark, radio silence. And then Alpha Team is sent in. Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, Joseph Frost, Brad Chickenheart Vickers, and their enigmatic Captain Albert Wesker.
The game wastes absolutely no time in establishing immediate high stakes. They discover Bravo Team's crashed helicopter with pilot Kevin Dooley already dead. Then, Alpha Team is suddenly attacked by ravenous Dobermans, those mutant dogs.
The Cerberus, yeah, terrifying intro.
Joseph is mauled to death. Brad flees in their helicopter, leaving the survivors to take shelter in this mysterious, sprawling mansion. It sets the tone instantly. You are vulnerable, you are trapped, and something is very, very wrong. Your sense of security is shattered within minutes.
So, right away, members of your team are separated. Barry and Chris's story, Chris and Jill's, and then your character is left to investigate unsettling noises. You stumble upon Bravo team member Kenneth J. Sullivan being eaten by the first zombie you see.
That head turn. Iconic moment.
Unforgettable. And then Wesker and Jill and Chris's story just mysteriously vanish. It piles mystery upon mystery, building immense curiosity. Who is this threat? Where did everyone go? What other horrors await?
As the player explores, they find more of Bravo Team massacred. Forest Spire, pecked to death by crows in that weird balcony trap.
Yeah, that got me the first time.
Richard Aiken, succumbing to venom after being bitten by that giant mutated snake called Yawn. And then Captain Enrico Marini is brutally shot dead by a mysterious sniper just after he reveals that there's a mole in STRS.
The plot thickens, a traitor among them.
The only other survivor found is field medic Rebecca Chambers, who Chris rescues. This ratchets up the tension and suspicion, making you question everyone, even your remaining allies. The sense of betrayal hangs heavy in the air.
And the mansion itself isn't just an old spooky house, is it? It's a labyrinth hiding a much darker secret.
The puzzles hint at something more complex.
No, it's revealed to be a secret research facility of the Umbrella Corporation, a pharmaceutical company secretly producing bioorganic weapons, or BOWs, for the black market. The T-virus, capable of turning infected species into flesh-eating zombies and other monsters, is responsible for all the horrors you encounter.
So, corporate greed creating monsters. Classic.
This is where the stakes elevate dramatically from personal survival to a terrifying global threat of bioterrorism. The implications are chilling. What if this gets out?
And then the ultimate shocking betrayal, the mole reveal.
The player discovers that Wesker, your captain, the very person who led you into this nightmare, is the mole. He's an Umbrella employee embedded in STARS to monitor their operations and collect combat data on the BOWS.
Sunglasses at night. Should have known. Hey, right. He even blackmailed Barry Burton into helping him by threatening his family, though Barry can turn on Wesker if he survives and learns the bluff. This betrayal adds a deeply personal, heartbreaking layer to the global stakes, making you question trust itself. Who can you rely on?
It all culminates in this intense final showdown where everything you've learned comes crashing down in the lab beneath the mansion.
Wesker, in a desperate attempt to eliminate the survivors and cover his tracks, unleashes a tyrant, a BOW super soldier in a giant tank. But of course, his plan spectacularly backfires. The tyrant impales him first before focusing its terrifying power on the player.
Hoisted by his own petard. Or, tyrant claw.
Pretty much. Optionally, you can save the other playable character from a holding cell using MO discs, and if your partner survived, activate the self-destruct sequence for the mansion. The frantic escape to the helipad, Brad Vickers' heroic return in the helicopter,
Drugny shows up,
and the final explosive use of a rocket launcher to kill the tyrant are all climactic, high-stakes moments that leave you breathless. That final shot is so satisfying.
And the consequences are terrifyingly real, aren't they? The game's ending varies dramatically based on who you save or if the self-destruct is activated. Canonically, Chris, Jill, Barry, and Rebecca survive, and the mansion is destroyed.
But it's not.
If not, the cannibalistic murders continue, and the tyrant is loose, raising the stakes beyond just the immediate characters to the wider world, leaving a chilling what-if in your mind. What happens to Raccoon City if you fail?
It creates a powerful sense of player agency and consequence, ensuring that every decision, every bullet, every ally saved or lost feels impactful on a grander scale.
The truly striking aspect of this is the layers. A secret corporation, bioterrorism, a mole in the elite team, and monstrous experiments. This isn't just a zombie game, it's a deeply woven mystery with incredibly high personal and global stakes. It really makes you curious about what other hidden horrors are lurking just beneath the surface of this world. It's a compelling narrative, even with its B-movie sensibilities, you know. 3. Behind the mansion doors, the twisted path to production. Knowing the intricate plot, the terrifying gameplay, and the sheer tension Resident Evil delivers, you have to wonder about the people behind the curtain crafting this dread. The production of this game was quite a human story of dedication, innovation, and some decidedly unconventional methods.
It truly was. Production took a significant 3 years, starting in 1993, which is a long incubation period for a game of that era. What's even more remarkable, and speaks to the profound early stakes he carried, is that Shinji Mikami worked alone for the first 6 months.
6 months alone? Wow.
Yeah. He was creating concept sketches, designing characters, and writing over 40 pages of script, essentially laying the entire groundwork for this massive project himself. That singular vision early on set the tone.
And for the monsters and character animations, you'd think they'd leverage cutting-edge technology for the time, like motion capture. Capcom had the resources, right? But surprisingly, that wasn't the case at all, was it?
Interestingly, despite Capcom actually having its own motion capture studio, none was used for Resident Evil. Instead, the animators referred to books and videos to meticulously study human, spider, and other animal movements.
Old school research.
Totally. This approach allowed them to create the game's distinct, often uncanny animations, giving the creatures and characters a very specific, unsettling feel that wasn't quite real but felt incredibly effective, almost unnervingly so. It adds to the game's unique, creepy atmosphere. Think about how the hunters move or the zombies shuffle.
Yeah, there's a jerky, unnatural quality. That's a fascinating detail, how they used old school research for such innovative and disturbing results. Beyond Romero, were there any other major filmic inspirations that shaped the game's atmosphere?
Absolutely. Many of the mansion's unsettling pre-rendered backdrops were directly inspired by the Overlook Hotel from Stanley Kubrick's iconic 1980 horror film, The Shining. You can see it in the architecture, the isolated feel.
Ah, okay, I can see that. The sense of place being inherently malevolent.
Exactly. Mikami also cited George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead, which he referred to as Zombie, but intriguingly as a negative inspiration. He explicitly stated he wanted to do things differently from that film, pushing the horror in his own unique direction, which shows a developer critically engaging with his influences, not just copying.
So he saw what he didn't want to do, which can be just as creatively powerful as knowing what you do want. Were there any characters that almost made it into the game but got cut, changing the dynamic of the STRS team?
Yes, in pre-production, they conceived of Dewey, an African-American man intended for comic relief.
Comic relief in Resident Evil.
Yeah, maybe dodged a bullet there. Yeah. And Gelser, a big cyborg strongman. Both were later replaced by Rebecca Chambers and Barry Burton, respectively. It's curious to think about how those characters might have altered the tone or dynamic of the STRS team, perhaps lessening the tension with humor or changing the stakes with a more overtly powerful character like a cyborg.
One point that really stands out to me is the sheer amount of groundwork laid by Mikami alone and the unconventional path they took for animation. It raises an important question. In an era before advanced motion capture, how did they manage to create such viscerally disturbing creatures and character reactions that instilled such pervasive dread? It truly speaks to pure artistic skill and dedication, and a unique eye for unsettling detail.
It absolutely does. And this human element, with all its quirks and challenges, extended to the infamous live-action sequences, and of course the voice acting that became so legendary.
The voice acting. It's legendary for a reason, almost a character in itself. Let's talk about how that came to be, those opening FMVs.
The live-action full-motion video, or FMV, sequences were filmed in Japan with a cast of American actors. You had faces like Charlie Kreslovsky as Chris, Inez Jezinowski as Jill, and Greg Smith as Barry, among others, bringing these characters to life in those opening moments. Cheesy, but memorable.
Very memorable.
Interestingly, even the Japanese releases featured English voice acting with Japanese captions, meaning the distinct English performances were part of the game's original vision across all markets.
So this wasn't just for the international audience. The Japanese players got English voices too. That really elevates the stakes of those performances, makes them even more central to the original intent.
Correct. The recording happened in a studio in Tokyo. And here's where things get truly wild. Lynn Harris, the voice director, intentionally based her direction on making the performances camp. Intentionally.
Yeah.
She drew inspiration from films like Dawn of the Dead, The Blob, and the Rocky Horror Picture Show. This is a deliberate choice that profoundly shaped the game's unique tone, adding to its B-movie charm.
So it wasn't an accident that the dialogue became so memorable. Master of unlocking. Jill Sandwich. It was a conscious artistic decision. And it certainly delivered. I think a lot of us have tried to imitate Barry Burton at parties.
Not at all. It was an artistic choice, aiming for that B-movie charm. Although, it's worth noting that Japanese voice performances were also recorded, but were ultimately discarded because Mikami found them really lame. Lead programmer Yasuhiro Ampo later reflected on the poor localization of the English script, hindering realism for international audiences, suggesting a potential disconnect between the intended camp and how it was received by some or how it played against the horror.
A bit of a mixed message there, maybe. And the Japanese version even had exclusive music, right? Adding another layer of unique identity.
It did. The original Japanese PlayStation version featured a unique vocal ending theme, Yunde Owarasenai, which translates to I Won't Let This End as a Dream. It was performed by Japanese rock artist Fumitaka Fuchigami and is conspicuously absent in any other versions of the game, making it a rare artifact for collectors. Kind of a cool J-rock ending.
Okay, to break that down for us, the voice acting in Resident Evil is legendary for its distinct quality. Was this camp intentionality a stroke of genius that added to its B-movie charm, or an unfortunate side effect that some players couldn't quite reconcile with the horror? How did this specific choice impact the game's initial reception and its enduring cult status? It's a fascinating element that sparks a lot of debate, and certainly adds to its unique identity.
It's a fascinating dichotomy. For some, it enhances the B-movie aesthetic and makes the game more endearing, adding to its distinct personality and making the horror more palatable almost. For others, it might have detracted from the sheer terror, took them out of the moment. But regardless, it's undeniable that it became a huge part of its identity, a talking point that persists decades later.
And given all these creative choices, the technical challenges, and the niche horror genre, you'd think Capcom would have had high hopes for its commercial performance, right? Expecting it to be a massive hit after all that work.
You'd think so, but not at all. And this is where the story of Resident Evil's unexpected success becomes truly remarkable, raising the stakes dramatically after the fact. Producer Tokuro Fujiwara only expected to sell around 200,000 copies.
Only 200,000. That's tiny for a flagship game.
Right. Mikami himself admitted he was a little worried about how well a horror game would really sell. Lead programmer Yasuhiro Enpo went even further, stating that Capcom did not expect the game to be successful. These low expectations truly highlight the gamble they were taking on a nascent genre with a complex development. They just weren't sure if people wanted to be scared like this.
Talk about defying expectations. They really underestimated its potential, so what happened?
Despite these conservative estimates and genuine reservations, Resident Evil became an international bestseller, quickly becoming the highest-selling PlayStation game at the time. By December 1997, it had sold approximately 4 million copies worldwide and had grossed over US $200 million, which is equivalent to over $401 million in 2024. All PlayStation versions combined sold over 5.08 million units worldwide. A staggering success story.
Wow. Wow. The real twist comes when you consider that Capcom went from expecting a niche success to hitting a multi-million-dollar jackpot. What does this profound commercial success tell us about the industry's perception of horror games at the time and the untapped market that Resident Evil courageously opened up? It truly changed the game, both literally and figuratively, for horror in the video game space, proving that fear could be incredibly profitable.
It showed that there was a massive appetite for mature, terrifying interactive experiences, a market the industry had largely underestimated. It redefined what was possible for a horror game to achieve commercially, paving the way for so many others. From Biohazard to Resident Evil, navigating the global stage.
So the game became a runaway success, but that journey to global domination wasn't without its significant changes and challenges. One of the most curious stories is about its very name and the censorship battles it faced heading west. It wasn't always Resident Evil, was it?
Indeed. The original Japanese title Biohazard had to be changed for North American and European markets. Chris Kramer, Capcom's director of communications at the time, discovered it was impossible to trademark Biohazard in the US.
Why was that?
Because of existing uses, specifically the 1992 Sega Genesis game Biohazard Battle and the influential New York alternative metal band Biohazard.
The band, right, so legal hurdles.
Exactly. This highlights the high stakes of branding and legal protection in a global market, where a simple name can become a complex legal hurdle.
So they had to come up with something else, and quickly. How did they land on Resident Evil?
Capcom ran an internal company contest to find a new name, and Resident Evil was chosen, specifically because the game takes place in a mansion, that the characters essentially become residents of evil residents, I guess.
Makes sense. A bit on the nose, maybe.
Kramer himself initially found the name super cheesy, but the marketing team loved it and were ultimately able to convince Capcom Japan and Mikami-san that the name fit the game's atmosphere for Western audiences. The iconic international cover artwork, by the way, was created by the renowned comic artist Bill Sienkiewicz.
A super cheesy name that became iconic. That's a fantastic lesson in branding and the unexpected paths to memorability. But the name wasn't the only thing that changed for its international debut. There was also heavy censorship, especially in that intro movie.
Yes, the North American and European versions of the intro FMV were heavily cut, which significantly altered the initial impact of the game for many players. We're talking about specific removals like shots of mangled corpses, a Cerberus zombie dog being shot, Joseph's visceral death, Kenneth's severed head.
Kenneth's head, they cut that.
They cut the shot of the head, yeah. And even Chris Redfield smoking a cigarette was removed. Despite these extensive tweaks, the game was still one of the first games to receive the mature rating from the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or ESRB.
Even after all those cuts, it still got an M rating.
Exactly. This really highlights the inherent shocking nature of the content. Even after significant alterations, they couldn't remove the core horror.
What I find most intriguing about this is how close we came to playing Biohazard in the West, and how the game, even censored, still managed to push boundaries and earn that mature rating. What does this censorship imply about cultural sensitivities and the evolving understanding of mature content in games at the time? It makes you wonder how much more intense, how much more viscerally disturbing the original vision truly was before these cuts.
It certainly speaks to the different cultural tolerances for gore and violence in media, and how the burgeoning video game industry was grappling with how to classify and regulate mature content in its nascent stages. There was a genuine tension between artistic vision and market accessibility, especially for consoles.
And the changes weren't just cosmetic, right? There were also significant gameplay tweaks and difficulty spikes, specifically designed for the American market. It wasn't just about what you saw, but how hard it was to play.
That's right. For the North American and European releases, the auto-aim function was surprisingly disabled, making combat far more challenging and deliberate. You really had to line up those shots.
No more easy headshots.
And furthermore, the number of ink ribbons found by the player was significantly reduced, making saving even more strategic and risky. This directly heightened the game's inherent tension and the feeling of precarious survival for Western players, turning an already difficult game into an even more brutal test.
That's a bold move, making it harder for the international market, almost counterintuitive for wider appeal. What was the thinking behind that decision? Just make it tougher for toughness' sake?
Not exactly. Shinji Mikami explicitly stated that the American version was made harder at the request of the American staff so that the game could be rented and not be completed in a few days.
Wait, rentals. They made it harder to stop people beating it too quickly on a rental.
That's what he said. This is a fascinating glimpse into the commercial stakes and business strategies of the mid-90s gaming industry, where rental markets like Blockbuster were a significant concern, and studios wanted to ensure longevity for their titles. Mikami even noted this version proved fairly difficult, even for Capcom staff.
So they were literally trying to extend the rental period for players by making it tougher. That's incredible. A direct response to a very specific business model of the era. Did they try anything else?
They also had plans to eliminate the interconnected nature of item boxes, meaning items could only be retrieved from where they were originally stored, rather than from any item box. Imagine leaving the shotgun ammo across the mansion.
I know, it would have been a nightmare.
This change actually made it into preview copies of the US version, but was thankfully removed from the retail release due to likely feedback. However, this exact mechanic would later resurface as an unlockable difficulty setting in the 2002 GameCube remake, showing that even discarded ideas can find a new life.
This leads us to a crucial turning point. A game deliberately made harder to deter rentals. This is an intriguing peek into the commercial stakes and business strategies of the mid-90s gaming industry. How did these difficulty changes, especially the limited ink ribbons and no auto-aim, heighten the game's inherent tension and the feeling of precarious survival for Western players? It truly made every decision sweat-inducing, every step a calculated risk.
They turned an already challenging survival game into an even more brutal test of resource management and nerve, deepening the player's investment in every outcome. It truly amplified the survival aspect of survival horror for us in the West. V Evolving Fear. The many faces of Resident Evil.
The phenomenal success of Resident Evil naturally led to it being ported and re-released on various platforms, and each iteration brought its own unique flavor, often adding new features or even reintroducing previously censored content. This constant evolution is a testament to its staying power. They kept bringing it back.
The Windows version, released in December 1996, was particularly notable, as it finally featured the original uncensored FMV footage from the Japanese version.
Ah, the uncensored cut. Finally!
This included the full-color intro, Kenneth's grisly death scene, and the uncensored ending in their entirety. For international players, this was the first time they could experience the complete cinematic vision, free from the cuts enforced on the PlayStation.
So we finally got to see everything they cut from the PlayStation version. That's a major win for fans who wanted the full, unadulterated experience, raising the stakes on what a definitive version meant back then. What else did the PC version offer?
Absolutely. Beyond that, it added support for 3D accelerator cards, allowing for much sharper graphics if you had the hardware. And it introduced two new unlockable weapons, a MOC-10 for Jill and an FN Minimi for Chris, along with new unlockable outfits.
New guns and outfits, nice little bonuses.
It also included welcome quality of life improvements, like the ability to skip door animations, thank goodness, and, in Jill's game specifically, allowed saves without ink ribbons, subtly altering the tension for that character by making her journey slightly less punishing. It's even noteworthy for its recent re-release on GOG.com with compatibility improvements, bringing this classic to a new generation.
And what about the Sega Saturn version? Sega's console needed exclusives. What did that bring to the table in July 1997 to stand out in the console wars?
The Saturn port tried to carve out its own identity by adding a unique unlockable battle mode. In this mode, players traversed rooms from the main game, eliminating enemies with selected weapons and aiming for high scores. Sort of an arcade-style challenge.
A battle mode, interesting. Any unique enemies?
It even featured two exclusive enemies not found in the main game. A zombie version of Wesker.
Zombie Wesker, okay.
And a formidable gold-colored tyrant, and player performance was graded at the end, adding a competitive edge. The game's backgrounds were also touched up to include more detail, offering a slightly richer visual experience on the Saturn hardware.
And I hear the Japanese Saturn version was particularly gory, pushing those boundaries even further than the PlayStation original.
It was indeed the most gore-laden of all platforms. After decapitating a crawling zombie with a kick, the head would graphically remain on the floor, twitching. And the monstrous Plant 42 could actually cut characters in half before the game over screen, really upping the visceral horror.
Oof, they really went for it.
It also featured exclusive enemies like reskinned ticks, which were a breed of hunters, and a second tyrant in Chris's game before the final battle. Exclusive outfits for Jill and Chris were also added, giving players more options to customize their terror.
What's fascinating here is how each platform tried to stake its own claim, offering unique features to entice players. The Windows version finally gave international players the complete cinematic experience, while the Saturn tried to deepen the gameplay with its battle mode and exclusive content, plus extra gore. It really shows the constant push and pull between creative vision, technical capability, and market demands, each attempting to be the definitive way to experience the fear.
And that pursuit of newness or completeness sometimes led to controversy, especially with the PlayStation's director's cuts. It proves that revisiting a classic is always a high-stakes gamble. People get attached to the original.
Ah, the director's cuts. There's quite a story there, isn't there, involving promises and unexpected controversies? Why did they even make a director's cut so soon?
There is. The first director's cut, released in September 1997, was primarily produced to, quote, compensate for the highly publicized delay of the sequel, Resident Evil 2. People were getting impatient.
A make good, basically.
Pretty much. It was initially bundled with a playable pre-release demo of RE2, which was a huge draw, almost a peace offering to eager fans. The main addition to the game itself was an arranged mode that significantly changed the location of nearly every vital item and enemy placement, creating a fresh, challenging experience even for veterans who thought they knew the mansion inside and out.
Oh yeah, arranged mode really mixed things up. And they added new outfits and a special weapon too, didn't they? Giving players more ways to customize their experience and perhaps survive a bit easier.
Correct. The main characters and Rebecca received new outfits, and the handgun was replaced with an improved model featuring a random chance of decapitating a zombie, killing it instantly, a new visceral element that added a satisfying, albeit rare, reward in combat.
The headshot pistol? Yeah, that was cool.
It also offered a new beginner mode with easier enemies and doubled ammunition, alongside the restoration of auto-aim in all modes. So it tried to appeal to both new and old players, making it more accessible while also challenging the hardcore.
But the marketing for the North American and European releases claimed it featured original uncensored footage. Was that finally true, or was it another instance of differing regional standards and cuts?
Unfortunately, no.
Yeah.
The FMV sequences were still censored in the NAU director's cut, sparking considerable frustration among players who felt misled. Capcom claimed this was a localization mistake, where Capcom Japan mistakenly swapped in the US censored cinematics for Sony Computer Entertainment America's approval process.
A mistake. Convenient.
Capcom USA actually offered the uncensored intro as the free download 3 days after release to try and rectify it, which was unusual back then. However, the French and German PAL versions, which refers to the video standard used in many European and other countries, did feature the uncensored color entry, but still lacked the uncensored Kenneth death scene. This whole incident created a fair bit of tension for consumers who expected a truly director's cut experience.
So it wasn't quite the director's cut it claimed to be for everyone. And then came the director's cut DualShock Ver in August 1998, which added its own layer of controversy, particularly around its audio. What was that about?
This version, co-produced by Keiji Inafune, added crucial support for the DualShock controller's analog controls and vibration functions, which was great, enhancing immersion significantly. But its most infamous change was the introduction of a new symphonic soundtrack, completely replacing the original iconic score.
Replacing the original music. Bold move. Was it any good?
No. It was credited to composer Mamoru Samuragochi, who later admitted in 2014 that his orchestrator, Takashi Nagaki, actually ghost wrote it. And beyond that scandal, the new soundtrack was generally deemed inferior to the original, with the ambient theme for the mansion's basement. Well, let's just say it's considered by some to be one of the worst video game compositions of all time. It added a layer of unintended and widely disliked tension for players.
Oh, wow. The infamous basement music? I've heard about that. Here's where things get truly wild. The director's cut promised more, but delivered controversy from the recensored footage to the ghost-written, widely disliked new soundtrack. It raises an important question. What are the true stakes when a company revisits a beloved classic? Does the pursuit of newness sometimes undermine the original artistic intent, or just add another layer of fascinating, albeit messy, history? That soundtrack change is a particular moment in gaming history that still causes a stir, making you question the decisions behind such revisions.
It absolutely does. Tampering with a classic is risky. The Japanese DualShock Ver also came with a bonus disc featuring downloadable save data, footage of the unused Japanese dubbed versions of the live-action cutscenes,
The Japanese voices they didn't use.
and brief gameplay footage of the canceled original version of Resident Evil 2, the one often called RE 1.5. This offers incredible insight into the game's developmental past, almost a behind-the-scenes look at what could have been for the franchise. Real collector stuff.
Beyond the console versions, Capcom also experimented with shrinking the fear, bringing Resident Evil to mobile and handheld platforms. Some of these were ambitious successes, others notable failures, but all speak to the desire to keep the terror alive, even on tiny screens.
The most fascinating one might be the Game Boy Color version. A port developed by Hotgen was planned for late 1999, early 2000, but it was ultimately canceled by Capcom due to poor quality and the Game Boy's limited hardware, which, I mean, fair enough.
Yeah, cramming RE onto a GBC sounds ambitious.
But in a fascinating twist, an unfinished build of the ROM was leaked in 2012 after an anonymous individual requested $2,000 for it online. This version reportedly contained every room, cutscene, and almost all the items from the PlayStation version, which is mind-boggling given the hardware limitations of the GBC and the sheer ambition of the project. You can actually find videos of it online. It's wild.
A complete Resident Evil on a Game Boy Color. That's a testament to ambition, even if it didn't quite work out. What about the Nintendo DS, a platform known for its unique input methods, touchscreen, microphone?
The Nintendo DS port, Resident Evil. Deadly Silence, released in January 2006 for the series' 10th anniversary, was a much more successful experiment, demonstrating a creative reimagining. It included a classic mode, which was essentially the original game with minimal touchscreen enhancements, and a rebirth mode, which packed in more enemies and entirely new puzzles leveraging the DS's unique capabilities.
So, more than just a straight port.
Definitely. Character models were remade with better textures and different clothing, enemies had higher quality of detail, and it even restored the original soundtrack, prior to the DualShock Fur, thankfully.
Good call. And it fully embraced the DS's unique features, didn't it? Even those that might seem quite radical for a horror game, like blowing into it.
Absolutely. It utilized the dual screen top for map, ammo, health. Bottom for action and inventory. Very handy. It integrated updated controls from later Resident Evil games, like the 180-degree turn from RE3 and the knife button tactical reload from RE4. You could skip door animations and cutscenes. Rebirth mode featured entirely new touchscreen puzzles, knife battle sequences viewed first person with stylus swinging,
Stylus knife fights. Okay.
and even required blowing into the microphone to resuscitate comrades or using the touchscreen to shake off enemies for melee attacks. Talk about innovative, if a bit gimmicky for some.
Microphone blowing to save a friend in Resident Evil. That's certainly a radical new mechanic, profoundly altering how you interacted with the core tension. Did it work?
It was. Interesting. And despite the live-action footage still being censored, even in Japan, except for Kenneth's severed head, its uncensored gameplay and combat made it the first of 11 DS games to ever be rated Mature 17+ by the ESRB, raising the stakes for mature content on the platform. It even added wireless LAN support for up to 4 players in co-op, puzzles, escape, or competitive, highest score, destroying monsters, modes across 3 stages with 9 characters.
Multiplayer RE on DS. Wow. Beyond that, there were other mobile versions like Biohazard, the Operations in 2007, Resident Evil, Genesis in 2008, a Jill-only turn-based puzzle adventure, and even a Pacha slot machine in 2008. Capcom's commitment to the franchise led them to explore every possible avenue, even when the results were unconventional. They really milked it.
It just goes to show they were willing to try anything to keep the fear alive, no matter the platform, proving their dedication to the IP, or at least its marketability.
To break that down for us, consider the journey from a canceled Game Boy Color port that almost defied its hardware limits, to a Nintendo DS version that reinvented gameplay with microphone blowing and touchscreen knife fights. What does this relentless experimentation tell us about Capcom's unwavering commitment to the franchise? And how did these radical new mechanics impact the core survival horror tension of Resident Evil? It really makes you wonder about the balance between innovation and preserving the original essence of fear.
They understood the immense value of the brand and continually sought ways to reinterpret its core appeal for new audiences and technologies, even if some attempts were more successful than others, proving that the concept of survival horror itself was incredibly adaptable and resonant. A cultural resurgence. The enduring legacy of Resident Evil.
So, we've seen Resident Evil's humble beginnings and its twisting path through development and multiple platforms. But its story doesn't end there. Its ultimate impact goes far beyond the game screen. It truly defined a genre and influenced media in ways that are still profoundly felt today, solidifying its place in cultural history. It wasn't just a game, it was bigger.
Here's the crucial insight. Resident Evil wasn't just a game in a genre. It was the first game to be dubbed a survival horror, a term it's specifically coined for the genre.
They coined the term, wow.
Yeah, Capcom marketing, apparently. This wasn't just a descriptor, it was a new category of interactive experience that changed how we classify and understand horror games, giving a name to a profound new emotional experience. GameSpot even listed it as one of the 15 most influential video games of all time, crediting it with successfully redefining the genre that started with Infogrames Alone in the Dark. It took those ideas and just blew them up.
It essentially created a new vocabulary for gaming, allowing us to articulate a specific kind of terrifying experience. And it also propelled video games in a new direction, visually and narratively, didn't it? With those FMVs and camera angles.
It's widely credited with taking video games in a cinematic direction with its B-movie style cutscenes. Its live-action opening, though controversial and heavily censored, was a key part of this new approach to narrative presentation. The Chicago Tribune even stated in 1997 that it revolutionized gaming. It showed that games could tell stories with a flair previously reserved for films, raising the stakes for narrative presentation in interactive media and pushing the boundaries of what a game could be.
What's fascinating here is how a single game gave a name to an entire new form of entertainment, defining its very essence. It raises an important question. How did Resident Evil's specific blend of scarce resources, fixed camera angles, and undeniable B-movie flair create a blueprint that so many other games would follow? It set the definitive standard for what a terrifying, immersive experience could be, influencing countless titles that came after it. Silent Hill, Dino Crisis.
It perfectly balanced action with meticulous resource management and an overarching sense of dread, forcing players into a state of constant vulnerability that became incredibly addictive and profoundly influential, demonstrating the power of interactive fear. It showed developers how to make players feel powerless, yet engaged.
And its influence wasn't limited to just games. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Resident Evil is credited with single-handedly doing something truly monumental, sparking a massive revival of the zombie genre in popular culture, like bringing zombies back in a huge way.
That's absolutely correct, and it's a monumental cultural stake. It's credited with sparking a revival of the zombie genre in popular culture since the late 1990s, leading to a renewed interest in zombie films by the 2000s. This means that long before The Walking Dead or 28 Days Later, it was Resident Evil that essentially brought zombies back from the cinematic grave.
So the zombie craze we've lived through owes a lot to this game.
A huge debt. The game also played a crucial role in shifting zombie origins from supernatural themes to scientific themes, using the T-virus, science gone wrong, to explain their existence, which was a significant departure from traditional voodoo or magic-based zombies seen in earlier films.
And this influence wasn't just anecdotal, it demonstrably impacted some major figures in modern horror and zombie storytelling. People have actually said this.
Indeed. George A. Romero, the godfather of zombies himself, stated in 2013 that Resident Evil and the House of the Dead, more than anything else, popularized zombies in early 21st century pop culture. In fact, a documentary about George A. Romero's Resident Evil, apparently he was attached to direct the movie at one point, is even set for a January 2025 release.
Romero himself said that. Wow.
Alex Garland, the screenwriter-director of 28 Days Later, credited the original Resident Evil video game as a primary influence on his script and for revitalizing the zombie genre. He loved the game.
Simon Pegg, the star and co-writer of Shaun of the Dead, also credits the original game. And Robert Kirkman, the creator of the Walking Dead comic book, cited Resident Evil as his favorite zombie game, which is high praise indeed coming from him.
Even Greg Nicotero, a director and special effects guru for the Walking Dead TV series, credited Resident Evil and the House of the Dead with introducing the zombie genre to a whole generation of younger people. This ripple effect led to a massive wave of zombie media, Critically acclaimed films like 28 Days Later, the terrifying 2004 Dawn of the Dead remake, Shaun of the Dead, World War Z, influential graphic novels like The Walking Dead, popular TV shows, and countless books. The cultural landscape of horror was irrevocably changed.
And the Resident Evil film adaptations themselves, despite varying quality maybe, became the highest grossing film series based on video games, grossing over $1 billion worldwide. That's an incredible achievement, cementing its legacy across multiple media.
It really is. It demonstrates the profound and far-reaching impact of this game, not just as entertainment, but as a genuine cultural touchstone that bled into everything.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't just about a game being popular. It's about a game fundamentally altering the very fabric of popular culture itself. Resident Evil single-handedly brought zombies back from the cinematic grave, changing how we tell stories and view horror across all media. What other video games have had such a profound, yet sometimes uncredited, influence on mainstream culture? It's a truly meaningful conversation about the hidden power of video games to shape our collective imagination.
This game stands as a powerful testament to how interactive media can shape broader cultural narratives, even becoming the silent architect of an entire subgenre's resurgence. Its influence is just huge.
Despite all this monumental success and influence, Resident Evil wasn't without its criticisms, as we've touched on. It holds a complex legacy, balancing widespread acclaim with its acknowledged, often endearing flaws. How did critics actually receive it back in '96?
That's the fascinating paradox of Resident Evil. The original PlayStation version was critically acclaimed, receiving an aggregated rating of 91 out of 100 on Metacritic, which is fantastic. Famitsu, the revered Japanese gaming magazine, gave it a near-perfect 38 out of 40, ranking it among the highest-rated games of 1996, alongside giants like Super Mario 64 and Tekken 2.
High praise indeed. What did they like specifically?
Critics lauded its graphics, gameplay, sound, and atmosphere, its gripping pace, the heavy challenge of both the combat and the puzzles, and the replay value offered by two playable characters. Many highlighted its ability to be genuinely scary, a rare feat for a video game at the time. It really got under people's skin.
So universal praise for the terror it delivered, for creating that constant high-stakes feeling. But then there's that one thing, the elephant in the room, that even today brings a smile or maybe a cringe to many players' faces.
The persistent criticism was overwhelmingly directed at its dialogue and voice acting, which were often described as mostly laughable. The game even holds a Guinness World Records Gamers Edition 2008 entry for Worst Game Dialogue Ever, a dubious but memorable honor.
Worst ever? Ouch.
Anpo's later comments about poor localization echo this sentiment, suggesting it was a significant, albeit charming, flaw for many.
And yet, despite that glaring flaw, it has received so many accolades that overshadow it, proving that the core experience transcended any presentational quirks. It's still considered a classic.
It truly has. It's universally recognized as the survival horror coiner. Next Generation ranked it 91st top game of all time in 1996, stating it successfully redefined the genre. Game Informer called it one of the most important games of all time in 2007, and Time magazine named it one of the 100 greatest video games of all time in 2012. It was included in G4 TV's top video games of all time, and was recently inducted into the World Video Game Hall of Fame in 2024.
Hall of Fame, nice.
Retro Gamer readers voted it 37th top retro game, calling it one of the finest horror-themed games ever, and Stuff ranked it as the third best PlayStation game of all time.
Yeah.
An undeniable, enduring legacy.
So what does this all mean? How can a game be simultaneously criticized for its laughable dialogue and celebrated as one of the greatest video games ever made that defined an entire genre? This dichotomy is fascinating and speaks to the game's undeniable power to create an immersive, high-stakes experience that transcended its flaws. The raw fear, the pervasive tension, the insatiable curiosity it ignited in players far outstripped any minor narrative foibles. It teaches us that authentic experience often matters more than perfect presentation.
It's compelling proof that sometimes the raw, visceral experience and innovative gameplay can outweigh imperfections in presentation, especially when it taps into a primal human emotion like fear so effectively, it makes the player truly feel the stakes of every moment. The feeling was just that strong.
Wow. We've journeyed from a humble Japanese horror remake, Sweet Home, to a global phenomenon that spawned an absolute empire. We've uncovered the ingenious, sometimes accidental, design choices that built its iconic tension, navigated the twisting challenges of its production and localization, and charted its explosive impact on both gaming and popular culture. Resident Evil wasn't just a game. It was a masterclass in crafting fear and raising the stakes that truly rewrote the rules for interactive horror and brought the undead back to vibrant, terrifying life.
It truly was a cultural event that resonated far beyond the confines of its digital world, proving the profound influence video games can have on our broader cultural landscape. Its shadow looms large even today.
So as you think about the games and stories that have truly stuck with you, consider this. What other cultural movements or creative works might have an uncredited video game at their root, subtly pulling the strings of popular imagination, much like Resident Evil did for zombies? How many hidden influences are shaping the world around us, just waiting for their own deep dive?